Hi friends, welcome back. Today we're going to be reading a book called Pioneers to the West, which I am super excited about. I grew up playing the Oregon Trail, so I think this kind of stuff is super interesting. I hope you guys enjoy the book and learn something cool today. In the 1800s, Americans started moving west. These settlers, or pioneers, left their homes for many reasons. Some were looking for new farmland. Others went in search of gold. Some were drawn by adventure or by the chance to start new businesses. For all of them, the trip west meant a new life. As these settlers headed west, they sometimes came into conflict with American Indians. The U.S. government had taken Indian lands for the pioneers to settle. Some Indians refused to leave without a fight. Many children traveled with their families to the west. Some even went on their own. About 1 out of every 5 pioneers was younger than 18 years old. Between 1840 and 1865, about 40,000 children went west. This book will explore the stories of some of these young pioneers. In 1855, U.S. poet Walt Whitman published this poem, Pioneers, O Pioneers. In these lines from the poem, he describes the people heading west. O you youths, western youths, so impatient, full of action, full of manly pride and friendship. Plain I see you, western youths, see you trapping with the foremost. Pioneers, O pioneers. What kind of person do these words make you think about? Mormons believe in a type of Christianity that developed in the United States in the 1830s. They first settled in western Illinois, but conflicts with their neighbors made them head west. In 1846, they followed their leader, Brigham Young, to the Salt Lake Valley. Today, this is in the state of Utah, but in 1846, it was not yet part of the United States. The Mormon Trail was the path Mormons followed from Illinois to present-day Utah. It stretched about 1,300 miles from the Mississippi River to the Salt Lake Valley. George Staples was born in England. As the oldest son in his family, he went to the United States to seek his fortune. Meanwhile, his parents raised the money for the rest of the family to follow. In 1848, George headed west from Illinois with a group of Mormon pioneers. He was only 14 years old. George grew sick on the road. His fellow travelers did not want to stop and wait for George to recover, so they left him with a local fur trapper. Between 1846 and 1869, about 70,000 people followed the Mormon Trail. The trapper, whom George stayed with, was friendly with a tribe of American Indians called the Sioux. Using herbal cures from local plants, a Sioux woman nursed George back to health. George soon grew well. He wanted to return to his people, but the Sioux could not understand his language. They cared for George and treated him as one of their own. As time passed, George began to enjoy his new life. He dressed in Sioux clothing and followed the Sioux's ways. In the mid-1800s, American Indians made their clothing from plants and animal skins. They sometimes used feathers and shells for decoration. In the mid-1850s, young American Indian boys played with toy bow and arrows and rode fake horses. They also played a game called Shiny, which was like hockey. Players used wooden sticks to push a ball into the goal. In 1850, George's father, James, had arrived in Salt Lake. He heard stories from travelers who had seen a white boy living with the Sioux. Finally, a group of settlers went looking for George. When the young boy saw his father, he ran into his arms. American Indian life seemed strange to new settlers. George never forgot his Sioux mother, and he visited her often. As a man, he wrote treaties, which are agreements, between the Mormons and the local Indian tribes. In 1848, an inspector visited a sawmill in California. A sawmill is a building where logs are cut into boards. In a ditch, the inspector noticed something glittering in the water. It turned out to be gold. Many people were inspired to travel west by posters similar to this. Helping people travel to California was big business during the gold rush. Many businessmen made more money by organizing trips to California than miners made by finding gold. First, the sawmill's owner, John Sutter, was able to keep the discovery secret. But word got out, and soon thousands of people were flocking to California. The gold rush was on. People who went to California in search of gold became known as 49ers. They got this name because the gold rush began in 1849. Miners set up camps wherever they found gold. The trail of camps became known as the Golden Chain. If there was enough gold, a mining camp could grow into a town. Some of these towns still survive today. John McWilliams of Griggsville, Illinois, was not a typical 49er. He was often sick as a boy, and his mother and brother had both died of lung disease. But by 1849, when he was 16, John told his father he was going to California or die. John set out with 3 friends from home. Unlike many pioneers, he was never sick on the trail. John did not have much luck when it came to mining. He and his friends did not know much about finding gold. He wrote, "The California gold diggings, of which we thought so much, didn't look like a bit as we thought they would. In my imagination, I thought I was going to dig gold out by the bucketful." Early miners used rocker boxes to separate gold from other rocks in a river. Then, one day, John met a friend from home. He showed John how to use mining tools. John was a quick learner, and he found $100 worth of gold in one day. John's luck did not hold. By the spring of 1850, he and his friends decided to move on. John's adventure then took him to Panama, in Central America, and New Orleans, Louisiana. He finally settled in St. Louis, Missouri, and raised a family. His granddaughter became the famous chef, Julia Childs. This painting by artist Charles Christian Nall is called Miners in the Sierra. Nalls painted it in 1851. A man named Levi Strauss made his fortune by inventing something the miners needed. He made a new kind of pants that could withstand the tough life of the miners. The jeans that many people wear today were invented by Levi Strauss. Not all of the pioneers were living with American Indians or searching for gold. Most lived simple lives, working on farms or raising animals. Some moved many times, always looking for the next opportunity or chance to make their lives better. Laura Ingalls is shown here with her parents and her 3 sisters, Mary, Carrie, and Grace. Laura is the middle girl in the back row. Laura got a love for reading and learning from her mother. From her father, she got a combination of independence and adventure. Charles Ingalls called himself a pioneer man. Laura would later call herself a pioneer girl. Laura Ingalls was born in 1867 in Wisconsin. She was the second of 4 girls in her family. She also had a little brother, but he died before he was a year old. It was not unusual for children to die young in those days. When Laura was only 3 years old, the family moved to Kansas. Laura's father had heard there was good farmland in Kansas. At the time, this was still Indian territory. American Indians lived there and laid claim to it. Laura called her Kansas home the Little House on the Prairie. This picture shows what it would have looked like inside. After a year in Kansas, money problems forced the Ingalls family back to Wisconsin. Laura's father, Charles, was always looking for new opportunities, and soon the family moved to Minnesota. There they lived in a dugout house. This was a house that was actually dug out of the earth. They had a dirt floor and grass on the roof. The Ingalls family would have lived in a dugout house like this. Dugout houses were small and hard to keep clean, but they were warm in winter and cool in the summer. Most settlers had a stove that they used for both heat and cooking. They burned whatever fuel they could find. If they did not have wood, they burned hay or even chips. These were dried cow droppings. When Laura was 12 years old, the family moved for the last time. Charles settled his family in the Dakota Territory, in what is now De Smet, South Dakota. Laura's family moved many times, as this map shows, before settling in the Dakota Territory. Life in Dakota was hard. The winter of 1880 was very cold and snowy. The many blizzards, or snowstorms, cut off all supplies. The family struggled to survive. Most pioneer children went to school only when they could. Other tasks, such as helping out at home, often came first. The school year usually ran from October to May. That way, children could be at home for planting and harvesting on family farms. Because her family moved so often, Laura mostly taught herself. When she went to school, it was in a one-room schoolhouse. There, children of all ages learned together. Laura and her sisters sometimes walked several miles to school. When she was growing up, Laura went to school in one-room schoolhouses like this one. During her time in the Dakotas, Laura met a farmer named Almanzo Wilder. They married in 1885. Laura was then called Laura Ingalls Wilder, the name people know her as today through her well-known books. Many years later, when she was in her 60s, Laura started writing about her experiences as a girl. In all, she wrote 8 books about life on the frontier. These Little House books are still favorites of readers today. This is a scene from the popular television series made in the 1970s, which was based on Laura Ingalls Wilder's books. If someone offered you land for free, would you take it? This is just what the U.S. government did when it passed the Homestead Act of 1862. A homestead was a piece of land a person could own simply by living on it for 5 years. The government had taken this land from American Indians. Many people took the governor's offer. Families moved west with their children to start a new life. Advertisements like this helped create excitement for the Homestead Act. Even when the land was not free, the price for it was very low. Ruth Chrisman headed west from Missouri with her family in 1883 when she was 11 years old. Her father raised cattle, which he sent west by train. The family, Ruth, her parents, her 3 sisters, and her 3 brothers, followed in wagon. Along with the family, those 5 wagons carried everything they owned. After meeting the train, they traveled another 137 kilometers to their homestead, which was 23 kilometers north of Broken Bow, Nebraska. Ruth was born in Waverly, Missouri. Her family moved to Broken Bow in the Nebraska Territory. You can follow their journey on this map. Between 1860 and 1870, the population of Nebraska grew from 29,000 to 123,000. This is almost 100,000 new people in just 10 years. Soon, the Chrisman family had settled in Nebraska. Ruth, called Babe by her family, helped with the work. She gathered wild fruit, such as plums and raspberries, in the nearby canyon. She loved the long summer days, when the prairie grass was taller than she was. Many pioneers, like Ruth's family, lived in the house made of sod, which is just dirt held together by grass. Winters were hard on the open range, meaning the areas of open grassland where cattle were raised. Storms swept across the prairie, and cattle, and sometimes people, would get lost and freeze to death. When she was 17 years old, Ruth started teaching school. She was in the classroom when a blizzard struck. She saved the lives of her students by taking them to a nearby house until the storm passed. It took 3 days. Between 1854 and 1929, more than 100,000 children went west on orphan trains. Some children went west without their parents. Poor and homeless children were sent by trains west from New York to live with farm families. The Children's Aid Society, which organized these orphan trains, still serves needy children today. Though many of these children were treated well, some were forced to work very hard. Both men and women could own a homestead. A person just had to be 21 years old. So, as each of the Chrisman's sisters turned 21, she claimed her own land. First came Lizzie, followed by Ludi Bell, and then Hattie. Unfortunately, by the time Ruth was 21, all of the best land had already been claimed. This photograph of the Chrisman sisters was taken in 1886. From left to right are Hattie, Lizzie, Ludi Bell, and Ruth. Ruth never liked the way she looked in this picture. Families on the prairie had to make their own fun. Ruth remembered the following stories about her prairie childhood. Since our neighbors were such a long distance when we visited each other, we spent several days. How happy we were when we would look out and see someone coming over the hill. We knew they were coming for the night. We only had 3 rooms in our sod house, but always had room for all that came. We would take down a bed or 2, put the table outside, and be ready for a dance. My brother played the violin, so we had our orchestra at home. We often danced till daylight. In 1845, a U.S. magazine writer said it was his country's manifest destiny, or fate, to stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. By the end of the 1800s, that dream came true, as Western lands were settled and turned into U.S. states. In 1850 to 1896, 15 new states joined the United States. The nation more than doubled in size. This painting by artist John Gast is called American Progress. It was painted in 1872. The country is shown as a woman moving from the cities on the East Coast, past the Mississippi River, and heading towards the West Coast. But this destiny came at a price. Throughout the 1800s, thousands of American Indians were forced off the land that their people had lived on for hundreds of years. They were sent to live in special places set up by the government called reservations. Those who refused to leave faced the force of the U.S. Army. This is a sad chapter in U.S. history. Starting in 1838, the U.S. government sent thousands of American Indians from their homelands in the East to Oklahoma. This journey became known as the Trail of Tears. As the stories in this book have shown, life was hard for U.S. pioneer children. They had to work as hard as adults. Many died young, but those who lived could be proud that they helped build a country. Many settlers followed one of these trails to the west. Traveling a well-known path made the trip safer. This map also shows the route American Indians in the east followed to reservations in the west. This path was called the Trail of Tears. John McWilliams headed west to California in search of gold. While he didn't make his fortune, he had plenty of adventure. George Staples' journey to the Salt Lake Valley was interrupted by the time he spent living with the Sioux. He remained friendly with local Indian tribes for the rest of his life. The Ingalls family lived in many different places throughout the Midwest. As an adult, Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote about her experiences in books that are still popular today. The Homestead Act allowed women, such as Ruth Chrisman and her sisters, to own their own land on the American prairie. These women rode horses and battled the elements right alongside men.